In this edition of DX101, we're talking logbook analysis. Now, it turns out it's a pretty loaded topic. There's a lot of stuff in here to get to, a lot of information. So we're going to actually split this up into a series of 3 videos, starting with part 1 here, where we take a look at taking all of our data out of a database or logging software and getting it into a spreadsheet. And then once we have it in a spreadsheet, or if you use a spreadsheet for your log, how we can then use things like pivot tables to allow us to kind of mold the data and do some analysis of what's already in the log. And then from there, in part 2, we'll pull in an online resource called Mesa Mike's station list for US stations, and we're actually going to do an export from his website to help us do a comparison between known stations that are in the US and what we've heard, so we can identify some gaps there. And then finally, in part 3, we kind of flesh that analysis out a little bit more. We go a little bit deeper into that, show some more examples, and we add another source, medium wave list, to help us with some analysis for some stations that we may be able to hear that are outside of the United States. It all starts with part 1 right now on DX101.
Keep up with DX Central. Follow us on Twitter at DX Central.
As a follow-up to our popular video on logbooks, which you can find a link to right up here, we're going to look today at logbook analysis. And what we're basically looking at with logbook analysis is a deep dive into the data that tells us what we've heard, or in some cases, what we haven't heard. And in today's DX 101, we're going to show you some spreadsheet functions and formulas that you can use to help you with that analysis so that you can put more stations in your logbook. Stay tuned. Now, obviously, I know that not every DXer is going to dive into their logbook the way that we're talking about today. Some of you may look at this and be thinking it's a bit overkill, but in my day job, I do data analysis. So this kind of stuff is part of what I do anyway. So I've always kind of been interested in taking the data that's there from what I've heard on the radio and trying to use it to help me hear more on the radio. So we're going to be diving into some advanced concepts today, and I'm going to try to slow it down, and I'm going to assume that you've never really used any of these functions before. Maybe you at least have used a spreadsheet before, you know what a spreadsheet is and how a spreadsheet basically works. But I'm going to introduce the concepts we're going to talk about today as if you've never heard of them before. So if you're already familiar with some of these concepts, some of this may be review, but maybe you'll hear some ways to apply it to DXing, okay? So I kind of teased it in the intro. It's not just about what we've heard. And that's a good part of analysis, is to take a look and say, I've heard X number of stations on this frequency, and I've heard X number of stations during sunset on this frequency, and things like that. We'll look at that. But there's another segment of this analysis that can help us visualize and see and identify those areas where maybe we haven't heard something that was missing, that we can use that data then to help us target specific areas, states, frequencies, what have you, to get more things into our logbooks. Those are the 2 things we're going to do today. We're going to take a look at how do we analyze what we have, and how do we identify what we haven't heard yet, and how can we use all that information to get more stuff in the logbook. Sound good? All right. With that being said, let's dive into the first part, which is taking the data that we have and getting it into a workable format so we can get a better sense of exactly what it is that's in that logbook and go from there. So I'm here in my logbook, and you guys know from our last video, I keep a database. If you are already in a spreadsheet, if you've already either exported your information to a spreadsheet or you're keeping it in a spreadsheet, this first part will be kind of review, or something you can skip, because we're going to show you how to get it into a spreadsheet and then go from there. So that's the first thing, is we have to export our data either out of the database or the logging program that we're using and get it into a spreadsheet. So you can be using a lot of different places for your logbook if you're not using a spreadsheet. I am going to be starting off with Microsoft Access. That's the first thing we're going to be using. And I'm going to start us off in the table view. I find it's easier to work with the data if we start here at the table view. So first thing I will do is once I'm in the table view, go to external data and then click on the button that says Excel. Again, if you're using OpenOffice or some other database program, just export it however you need to get it to an Excel spreadsheet, whatever that process is. Now, I am going to start by making a new file here. I'm going to call it example. But you, obviously, you're going to use whatever file format or file name that you want to use, and also the format you want to use as well. And then from there, I make sure I have my checkboxes checked here to export the data with formatting and to open the destination file after the export is complete. And then I hit OK. And I'm going to say yes. Because I've been playing around with this already, so I just wanted to get rid of that file. So here we go. So here is my logbook now in spreadsheet format. Okay, so I need it in a spreadsheet, either Excel, Google Sheet, Max Sheets program, OpenOffice's program, whatever program you're using for spreadsheets. You need your database exported into a file so that you have a table like this with all your data. Okay. So from here, doing analysis can be done, but it's going to be a lot more difficult. And the reason it'd be a lot more difficult is because everything's all in one table. And so, for instance, if I wanted to know how many countries I've heard, I can go over here and hit filter and then just count it and say I heard 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 countries. Okay. If I want to know how many stations I've heard in every state, I can filter by state and say, okay, Alabama, how many have I heard? I've heard 33. Okay. And then I record that down. And then I move to my next state and so forth. All that's going to take so much time, though. There's an easier way, and that easier way is called a pivot table. And what a pivot table basically does is it takes the data that we have in a table already, and every column being a field, right? And then all the rows are the data within those fields. So it takes all that data in all those columns, and it rearranges it so that you can literally pivot the data in the table based around whatever data field you want to use, whatever table fields you want to use. So in the case of state, I can use the state field here to pivot my data and get a count of how many stations I've heard in every single state. And I can also see how many states I've heard, right? So let's show you how to build that now. So the first thing I want to do is control all. I'm going to select all of my cells, all of my data. I want everything in the entire table. Now, again, in Excel, this is how the process works. If whatever spreadsheet program you're using, they sometimes may call it pivot or they may call it something else. I don't know. I haven't played with all of the different options that are out there. If you can't figure it out in your program, at the very least, save that into a Google Sheet. We showed you how to do that in our logbook video. So open that file in Google Sheets. There is a pivot function within Google Sheets. So at the very least, if you can't find it in whatever program you're using that's not either Google Sheets or Excel, save it, import that into Google Sheets, and now you have a working copy you can do a pivot table with, because they also have the same functionality. And it works pretty much the same way. So once I have selected everything, go to Insert Pivot Table, and I want to choose to put this on a new worksheet. And I hit OK. Now, what it does is it gives me over here, this little area right here is where my table is going to populate once I start to build it. And all the different fields that were in my original data that I selected when I hit select all of my original fields are over here for me to choose from. I can click and drag these fields into one or more, in some cases, of these boxes down here. And what these boxes represent are the ways that we're going to pivot the data. So usually the first thing you're going to do is add a field that you're going to count. And that's going to be put into the values field. I like to use in my logbook call sign. And the reason for that is I know that every record I have in my logbook has something in the call sign field, either actual call letters or it may say Radio Rebeldi or Radio Monumental or whatever, but every single station has some way I've identified it as what station it is. It's in that call sign field, so we're going to use that. And you can see, if I zoom in a little bit here probably, it's already counting for me that I have 540 records that it's found that have something in the call sign field. And that's how many logged stations I have in Mandeville. It's 540. So we're good so far. We're looking good. So back to my example of I want to count how many stations I've heard in every state and how many states have I heard. So obviously I'm going to be using my state field here. Now I can put that in the columns box over here. It's going to get a little unwieldy if I do so. I prefer always to work with, unless I need to use rows and columns, I prefer to have something in rows. So I'm going to put my state field in the rows. Now I can add a second field here to the columns, and then I have rows and columns. We'll get to that in a bit. But for our purposes now, just put state in the rows. And you'll see what it's already done here for me. And let me show you what this pivot table is telling me so you can understand how it thinks. It's telling me that it went and looked at all the data that I had selected in that whole big spreadsheet that I had. And it looked at every time it found a value in the call sign field, right? Which we said earlier is a field that we picked specifically because that is in every single record, okay? So every time it found a value in the call sign field, which for our purposes is every record, it then looked at the state field that's on that record. And it's told me how many times it's found each of those state fields that it found. So in the case of Alabama here, AL, it found it 33 times. AR, Arkansas, 21 times, and so forth. So that's what this pivot table is telling you. It's saying, I looked in all that data that you told me, and I was counting every time I found something in that call sign field. And when I did, then I looked over at the state, which is what we put in our row. I looked at the state, and I marked it. And I've counted every time I found something different under that state column or that state field. Now, obviously right now we have things like AB for Alberta. We have DX for things that are not US. I've got Ontario in here, ON. I want to get rid of those because those are not US states. And I want to be able to count specifically how many US states I've heard and really focus on that. So that brings us to our fourth function area that we have in pivot tables, which is filters. Filters are conditions that you can put on this table to say, I want to see all the data that is under this condition. So in this case, I want to get rid of anything that's not a US state. So I can use my country field, because I do mark every one of my logs with the country that it's I've heard here. And for the US stations, I mark USA. So I'm going to put country in my filters box. And then I'm going to go over here to the little pull down menu that it's created. And I'm going to go down to USA and hit OK. And you'll see AB is gone, DX is gone, ON is now gone. I am just looking at US states now because I've filtered all of this table to say, okay, of all that data that I give you, only show me records that have USA as the country. When you find a call sign value, tell me how many times you saw those individual state values. Count all the different state values you found and how many each one of those you found. And that's what it's doing for me now. It's using that USA as the filter by which all the data has to go through. If it's not USA, it's not counted in here. So now I can Command A and select my entire pivot table that's been created here. Command C or Control A, Control C, obviously if I'm using a PC. And go down here and hit the plus sign to create a new tab. And now I'm going to right click and choose the option for values. And the reason I do that is a clean paste. It doesn't bring any formatting or anything like that in here. I just want the actual data itself. I don't want any other formatting. Now I'm a little bit OCD when it comes to my tables. I like to make sure everything's labeled a certain way. So I'll go down here and I'll change this to say total because I don't like grand total. I'll label this as state, label this as logs and things like that. Now, I like to look and see what's my biggest, right? I want to see what's the state I have heard the most, what's my states I've heard the least. So I want to put this in an order and sort the data. So I want to be careful how I do that, though, because if I'm not careful, I could end up getting things wonky where this 33 that's right now tied to Alabama may get disconnected. So in order for that to not happen, what I want to do is I start in that first numeric value that I have here, that 33 that I have for Alabama, whichever value you might have on your side. I click and then I drag down to highlight all the different cells except for my total at the bottom. Okay, so I want to highlight all these numeric values. And then what I want to do once I've done that is I want to move my mouse over, or my trackpad or whatever, over to the left to then include the state values as well. But I want to start with the numeric value and then move to the state. And the reason for that is by selecting the numeric values first, when I do my sort, it's going to sort by those numeric values. And then it's going to keep that state value that's tied to it tied together. If I was to choose the state values first and then the numeric values, and I try to sort from largest to smallest, it's going to sort it alphabetically or backwards alphabetically. I don't want that. I want it to be by the numeric value. So you choose the numeric value first. Then I go up here to sort and filter, or you can also right click on your selection, go to sort and go largest to smallest. And now here you are. You can see Texas is my biggest state. I'm just adding some formatting in here. Texas is my biggest state with 79 stations heard. Louisiana is number 2 with 54 stations heard, and so forth, which is awesome. Now I know where I've got most of my logs coming from. It's Texas. No wonder I feel like I'm always hearing Texas. So that's if I'm just using like one thing, like just state. But I mentioned earlier I could do something such as a row and a column. What would be an instance where I'd want to do that? Well, let's take a look. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this filter because I want to go back now and I want to see everything, not just US stuff. I want to see everything. So remove your filter. Your count should now match your total number, right? This is a good example of a time when I'd want to use a row and a column. Let me highlight and click and drag frequency down into the rows. What this is telling me now is how many stations has it found under each frequency. So 530, it's found 2 that have a frequency listed of 530, 7 that have a frequency listed of 540, and so forth, which is awesome because I have a goal where I want to have at least 4 stations logged on every frequency. Okay, so this can help me find that very easily, but I'm not done. I also would like to do, because I do track the time of day. I put in the time that I heard the station, but I also keep a separate field specifically for time of day. And it's for this purpose right here. So if I go over and I click on time of day and put that in my columns field, now you'll see of those 7 stations that I've heard on 540, 4 of those I logged at night, 2 I logged during sunrise period, 1 was at sunset, nothing during the daytime. So right off the bat, I can tell you if I'm going to spend some time on 540 to try to add more stations, I'm going to do sunset and I'm going to do daytime. Those are my 2 first day parts that I'm going to look at, is sunset and daytime, because I have the fewest amount of things there. 550 is another good example. I have 5 stations heard on 550. I only have 1 at sunrise, 4 during the nighttime, nothing sunset, nothing daytime. So if I'm going to do some DXing on 550 to get that number up, it's going to be sunset first. I'll do some daytime to see if I can hear anything. And then I'll also do some sunrise as well. Now, is it very likely that the 4 stations I heard at night are going to be probably what I hear during the sunset and or sunrise? Very possible. It's very possible that I'll hear the same things sunrise, sunset that I've heard at night. But if the conditions are right, I may have something during sunset or sunrise that I haven't heard at night. That's how I can add more stations to my log. So again, now I go back over and I Control A to select, do a new tab. I'm going to right click, do my values, paste only just the values. I think for Mac it's paste special, and then values is the selection you would choose. And here you go. Now I can just build my table. I can, oops, that's not how you spell total. I can just reformat it how I want to. There we go. That's better. Another thing that I can do obviously here is I can then highlight all of my totals here. And then move left. And now I can sort from smallest to largest, because what am I trying to do here? I'm trying to fill those that have the least amount of loggings The ones that have the most, like down here at the bottom where I have 11 on these or 10 on these, I'm not going to probably want to spend a lot of time on those because I've already logged a lot. I'll get back to them later to do some more looking, but I want to focus on these down here or up here that I don't have as much on. So another thing that I'll do is I'll actually color code. Now this is me being super kind of picky about my formatting and my what I'm looking at because I'm a visual guy. So I'll color code the data. So for instance, this one right here for 1610, I don't like that. That's bad. I've only got one station logged there. Now it's 1610, but maybe I can hear a TIS. If I go over here to styles and then click bad, it makes it red, and that's easy for me to see. 2 is okay. It's not great, so I'm going to make this a different color. I'm going to make this, let's make this one kind of orangey. It's not quite red, but it's not quite yellow and kind of good, or better at least. 3, we're getting there. I'm going to make that a yellow for neutral, and then everything 4 more. That's my goal. I want to have 4 more on everything, so I'm going to highlight those and color them green for good. Now, I do the same thing for all these individual parts here where I have my sunset, sunrise, things like that. So I'll go over here and I'll say, okay, what's blank for sunset? Oh, that's bad. If I haven't done anything on it, that's super bad. We need to get something on there. So I'll highlight it. It's bad. It's blank. And then if I've heard one thing, I've at least logged something sunset. Okay, I've got something on here. I'm going to make this neutral yellow. Now you can also do conditional formatting and things like that if you want to. I'm not going to go into all that. I'm doing this very manually, very basically. And then basically at this point, anything that's more than 1 is good. I don't need to spend time on sunset with these frequencies because I've logged some stuff there. So I can move away from that. And I just go do that for all the different times of the day. And that's it. So this is one way that I actually use. I'll show you my completed one here. It's kind of like those cooking shows, right? When they do this, when they're like, here's my completed one that we cooked earlier. Here you go. Here's my completed one that I cooked earlier. You can see where I have all my formatting done here. All the stuff that's in red, that's something I need to spend time on that frequency during that time of the day. Anything that's in yellow would be the next kind of list that I would tackle. Anything in green, I can wait until later. And the priority would be to start and kind of say, okay, show me anything that's a 1, 2, or 3 here. These are my priorities to start with. And then from there, I would work off these times of day. And that's how I kind of fill in my logbook. So this is what I was talking about earlier when I said you can see if you can do an analysis on what's already in your log. That's one way of being able to fill your logbook and fill the gaps. And this is how one of the ways that I would do it is by doing an examination of the time of day and the frequency. Where do I have gaps? This tells me what I have, what I'm missing, based on what's already in the logbook. This is an easy thing for me to do, is to look at this and to kind of determine, okay, where are my gaps by frequency? The next thing we're going to look at is a little more advanced. We're actually going to be doing some looking at stations we haven't logged based off of some online resources that we can use to find the total population of stations that we could log. And that concludes part 1 of our 3-part video series. Make sure if you found this video to be helpful that you give us a like, give us a thumbs up, and be sure to leave a comment down below. Let us know what you thought. And as always, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you'll be notified when new videos are available. From all of us here at DX Central, my friends, thank you so much for being part of the fun. Now, be sure to click on the title card here for part 2, or if you want to go ahead and get to part 3, you can also do that as well. But I would start with part 2. That teaches you some great fundamentals on how you can pull in online resources such as Mesa mics to help you with some additional analysis. So let's go ahead and get to part 2 for DX101.